Hey, welcome back to another video. At the time I record this, the Knuckles series on Paramount Plus debuted just a couple of days ago, and being that I am a fairly big Sonic fan, I think the reasonable question to ask immediately is, did I enjoy it?
No, I did not.
Okay, that's maybe a little bit mean, but really it is not incredibly good. If you know me, or follow me on Twitter, I complain about the movies a lot. I've got many criticisms, but overall I think they are mostly good. Even if I've got issues, they're not out and out terrible. And when this series was announced, and as we got the trailers for it, the entire time it was being marketed, my question was always, why though? And now that it's out, I can safely say that that question has not been answered, and I still don't really know why this series existed. I probably should at least give the lowdown on what the hell the series is about. It takes place after Sonic 2 and is meant to bridge the gap into Sonic 3 and follows Knuckles, ostensibly, and his adventures with Deputy Sheriff Wade Whipple, who I did not remember from the first two movies, but he is there. He is in them. I just didn't remember him at all. And already that sort of puts me off, because far and away my least favorite part of the movies is the abundance of human characters. What I want out of a Sonic movie and a Sonic story is the Sonic world and the characters, and the human characters have been the least interesting part about the first and second movies. The second movie in particular, its entire human subplot can just be removed and you lose really nothing from the movie. And unfortunately that kind of rings true here. There's a lot of focus on the human characters in this, and they're not all that interesting. As you could probably guess by the fact that I didn't even remember Wade was in the movies, I don't really think he's that compelling of a character, and the series here doesn't really do a good job of changing my mind on that. In fact, it kind of makes me like him less, because he's just kind of annoying. He's the main character, and they really want him to be funny. There's a lot of comedy in this, and it doesn't always work. There's a couple of good gags here and there, but mostly it's pretty weak. And there is really not as much Knuckles in Knuckles as there really should be. There are two straight episodes, episode 4 and episode 5, where he's absent for a very large chunk of the runtime, which for a show called Knuckles, you would think you wouldn't do that. Like, the series is named after Knuckles, but there are long, very extended periods of time where he's just not involved with what's going on whatsoever. Now, the main plot of this, the large focus of it, is Knuckles teaching Wade to be a warrior, because Wade's whole arc here is that it starts off, he gets kicked off of his bowling team because he sucks, and so he wants to be better at everything in general, I guess. And through shenanigans, he ends up meeting Knuckles, and Knuckles, being a true warrior, which is his entire shtick in the movie, is the perfect person to help him with that. And in the meantime, Wade teaches Knuckles about settling into life on Earth, which is one of the things that this show could have been about more directly, is having Knuckles actually adjust to life in Green Hills, or just overall on Earth. But instead, we effectively get kind of a road trip-ish movie, where Knuckles and Wade are off to Reno for this bowling tournament. And in the meantime, there are these two rogue gun agents that are trying to capture Knuckles, whose names I don't remember. They are sort of important, but not really. They're trying to capture Knuckles for this dude called the Buyer, who is supposed to be the main villain of the thing, but is also absent for a very large portion of the show. Like, I genuinely think the Buyer shows up in the first episode, again for a little bit in the 5th episode, and then again in the 6th episode, and has a grand total of maybe 20 minutes of screen time. So the main plot of this, that's supposed to, like, the main villains, really feel very secondary to the whole thing. The rogue gun agents get more screen time because they're in most of the, like, second half of the first episode, and then they're in a good chunk of the second episode. So together, they've got a lot more screen time than the main villain of the friggin' series. And along the way on the road trip, we get a lot of gags, a lot of funny moments, or at least things that are ostensibly supposed to be funny. At the end of the second episode, Wade is officially wanted by the authorities. He ends up taking Knuckles to his mom's house because it's the perfect place to hide out, I suppose, as though a guy that they wouldn't look for the guy at his childhood home if he's being actively hunted down. That would be the first place I would look, so it seems like the worst hiding place to me, but, you know, Wade isn't exactly intelligent. And that third episode, by the way, is probably the absolute worst. It is mostly focused on Wade and his mom and his sister. It's a lot of Wade and his sister who are adults, presumably over 30 years old, acting like 5-year-olds, and it's embarrassing to watch. And I cannot believe that they thought that would be a good idea for an episode. It is elevated only by Wade's mom, who seems exactly as done with everything as the audience is. And we do at least get a decent amount of Knuckles in that episode, mostly him reacting to various Jewish foods and bonding with Wade's mom, which is kind of fun. But mostly it's focusing on Wade and Wade's family, who I'm not interested in, and the show is not named after. Plus, you get one of the more insane bits of egregious pop culture reference when we see Wade's room, and there's just 80s and 90s cultural ephemera all over the place. You got movie posters, you've got TMNT bedspread, you've got a standee from American Gladiators. It's banking really hard on the nostalgia, and that's one thing that kind of bugs me about this show. There are far, far too many pop songs in it. There's a lot of music use. And this has kind of been a thing ever since Guardians of the Galaxy came out, and it really heavily utilized older songs, but it did it well. A lot of things just cram in classic music to sort of try and recreate that, and that's very much what it feels like Knuckles is doing. You've got all kinds of old school music, Elton John, Scandal. Michael Bolton is there, and we'll talk a little bit more about Michael Bolton in a second, but it all feels too much. It's like, remember this? You know this song? This song's a classic. Here's this song. While I kind of appreciate it because, like, I hadn't heard the series opening theme, The Warrior by Scandal. I hadn't actually heard that song before, and I love it. It's great. But there is definitely too much. They really did not need that much music. It's insane. The third episode does at least end with a pretty solid action scene and a couple of really good gags, so it's not all bad. Then there's the fourth episode, which is an enigma. It is again largely Knuckles-less outside of the very beginning and end of the episode, with a little bit of his voice in between. Wade is captured by the bounty hunter Jack Sinclair, who he was friends with at the start of the show. They were on the same bowling team. He's the guy who kicked him off the bowling team. And while he's captured, Wade has this vision with Pachacamac, who is voiced by Christopher Lloyd, in an absolute waste of his talents. I hope it was a good paycheck at least. And for most of the episode, we are treated to this low-budget rock opera that is kind of amazing. Like, the first time I saw the episode, I've seen this show twice through now. The first time I saw the episode, I wasn't really sure what to make of it. But the second time through, I think I kind of dug it. It was a little bit of fun. It was clearly the episode they had the most fun making, and so that kind of rubs off on the viewer. It's this whole production, this neat little song telling Knuckles' backstory, which is what the show should have been about. And I realized that part of the way through that musical segment, I went, the events that they're describing here is what this show should have been chronicling. Because it's the interesting part. It's about Knuckles. It's us learning more about him and what he was doing prior to, like, Sonic 2. So I don't know why that wasn't really the case. I guess they really needed to crowbar in a human character, but it is at least kind of fun. This is where Michael Bolton comes in. He sings as Knuckles in the rock opera. And it's just absurd enough to work, I think, and features a cameo I really was not expecting. It's not even really a cameo, I guess, because it's imperative. It's like integral to it. The episode is called The Flames of Disaster, and on Twitter, as I was watching the episode and the title card dropped down, I went, oh man, I can't believe I didn't know Iblis was going to get involved in this. And then lo and behold, 2 minutes later, the fire demon pops up and it is literally Iblis. Does this mean that Sonic 06 is canon to the movies? No, I think they just thought it would be neat to design the fire demon off of Iblis. But regardless, as a dedicated Sonic 06 enjoyer, I was happy to see that. It was a neat little nod, even if I don't totally understand why they did it. But through the power of positive thinking and getting the true strength from his heart, Wade breaks out of the cage, defeats Jack in a joust, and gets his jacket and bike and hat, which is the hat that Knuckles wore in the Sonic OVA, and that was featured in the trailers, and that Knuckles wears for maybe a grand total of 5 minutes in this show. So Wade, having become a true warrior, I guess, then rides off with Knuckles, and his mom and sister come with them for some reason, off to Reno to the bowling tournament, where Wade finally meets his long-lost dad, who had abandoned him at a TJ Maxx. That seems like a weird detail, and it is, and I'm only bringing it up because they really liked to point out that he abandoned Wade at a TJ Maxx. And Wade's dad, Pistol Pete, is played by Cary Elwes in another absolute waste of a very talented actor. And you can tell basically immediately that there's something more about Pistol Pete, because he comes off as a very nice, fatherly kind of guy. He explains the reason why why he left way back when was because he was scared and a coward. But you can tell immediately that he's not on the up and up. And of course he's not. Later, it turns out that he sold out Wade to those rogue gun agents who finally reappeared after not having been in the show since the second episode. He's a jerk, and he is terrible, but it's kind of hard not to enjoy him on screen because Cary Elwes is still giving it his best, and Cary Elwes is just always fun anyway. There is another fight scene that is kind of half ignored and set to an Elton John song for about 5 seconds, and in the meantime, Wade rescues his mom and sister, who had been captured by the gun agents thanks to Pistol Pete. And in a truly unnecessary scene, Wade's sister dislocates her thumb to get out of the handcuffs, and I don't know why they decided to show it. I don't normally get squeamish over stuff like that, but I really had trouble looking at it, and obviously I'm not showing it right now because it's just kind of but be aware of that if you are off-put by stuff like that. Just know that there is a completely horizontal thumb during a thumbs up in the 5th episode. The rogue gun agents are sucked into a couple of rings, maybe dead, who knows. They're out of the show at that point. And then we can finally focus on the thing everybody cares about, obviously, the bowling tournament. And I doubt you will be surprised when I tell you that Wade wins the bowling tournament. Meanwhile, there is a much more interesting scene going on during the bowling tournament that is not being shown most of it. And it's Knuckles finally fighting the buyer, because the buyer shows up again in this giant mech suit. And the scene is really very similar to the end of the first movie. To the point where it's like, are we just rehashing scripts at this point? For reasons unknown, the buyer is able to grab Knuckles and drain his power. I don't really know what he needs with Knuckles' power. He already has a giant robot mech suit, and I don't really see how using Knuckles' power is going to make that giant robot mech suit any more resilient to, like, a giant missile or something. Since the bowling tournament is over, Wade can come out and help Knuckles after he gets all of his energy drained, and through an inspirational speech that is pretty typical of this sort of show, he manages to get Knuckles to awaken the flames of disaster, which is a power in this movie rather than a name for Iblis or whatever was really going on with it in Sonic 06. And the buyer is defeated and killed, just straight up dead, and the show comes to a happy ending very suddenly with a freeze frame high five kind of thing. There's a post-credit scene of Knuckles hearing The Warrior by Scandal, saying it's his jam, and then the show ends. It's a pretty anticlimactic ending, but I really couldn't imagine anything else happening in terms of how this show was going to end. So that's the gist of Knuckles. There's a lot of individual moments I didn't talk about because they're not strictly necessary. And at the end of the day, I think there was a good show in here at some point that maybe really early on when they started developing this series, it could have been really, really good. But then they started pushing this like bowling sports movie thing and all the comedy and all the retro nostalgia and whatnot, and it just kind of becomes this weird, confused mess that doesn't really totally seem to know what it wants to do. It is not the absolute worst thing I've ever seen. I think there's actually a lot of really good moments. Like I said, the 4th episode with the rock opera, on a second watch, I enjoyed it a lot more than I did the first time, and I kind of appreciate that bit now. It's, like I said, the right kind of ridiculous, I think, to the point that I enjoy it. The first episode is mostly pretty solid, probably because it's the only one that was directed by the guy who directs the movies, whose name escapes me right now, I am sorry. And then it's all just kind of downhill from there. It's not the worst thing I've ever seen. I've seen a lot worse. It's not even the worst piece of Sonic media. That definitely goes to Secret Rings or Sonic Live or something. But even by the movie's standards of quality, this is pretty poor. And like I said, I'm not a huge fan of the movies. I've got my issues with them, but they're at least more consistent and they have more of an idea of what they want to do than Knuckles did. Like I said, I think what this show should have been about is what is talked about in the 4th episode, Knuckles' backstory with his dad and fighting the fire demon and getting the flames of disaster. That is what Knuckles should have been about. Because honestly, I really can't see much or any of this connecting to Sonic 3 at all, unless they wanted to bring back the Rogue Gun agents or something. But even then, I really don't see any necessity in Knuckles at all. There is one little bitty moment that might have something to do with the 3rd movie. Near the end of the bowling tournament, when the fight is breaking out, the bowling commentators, who we also see way too much of, by the way, they point out that in 1974, a bowling tournament had been visited by an extraterrestrial, and they don't go into any more detail than that. But that would be 50 years ago. Project Shadow was 50 years ago. So maybe we'll see Shadow show up at a bowling tournament in Sonic 3? Maybe, if that even is what they're talking about and not just a weird thing. But yeah, ultimately Knuckles feels pretty unnecessary for the Sonic movieverse as a whole. And unless you're a really, really big diehard Sonic fan like me and you consume basically every piece of Sonic media, it's probably not really worth watching. Like I said, I've seen it through twice now, and I didn't like it overall, but there are highlights, there are good moments. I just don't really know if for most people that's worth it. You know, if you did watch the show and you enjoyed it, then cool. I love when people like things that I don't. I'm usually jealous about that, and I'm definitely jealous of the people who like Knuckles a lot more than I do. I wish I enjoyed it more than I did. And the only real solace I can get is knowing that probably Knuckles is not an indication of what we can expect in Sonic 3, again, due to the minimal involvement of the director of the movies. So, yeah, I think that's about going to do it for this video. If you enjoyed, then please consider giving it a like. It really helps me out. And subscribe if you want to stay notified of future videos that I do. I've also got a Twitter, which is linked in the description. You can usually see what I'm playing or watching or reading or whatever and kind of get an idea of what I'm going to be doing a video on next. So that's down there if you want to check that out. I also have a Patreon if you want to support me directly and get yourself some neat perks, but if you're not in a position to do so or you just don't want to, that is perfectly okay. Just liking the videos and sharing them around is more than enough. So yeah, that's all for now. I hope you have a good day, and I will see you guys next time. Also, there's a frickin' Paul Blart reference in this show? What?